Welcome back to the channel, guys. So today we're going to talk again about the subject of cryptocurrency mining, and last video we talked about the RTX 3090 GPU and how powerful it was, what the ROI was, etc, etc. Today we're going to go back to basics and we're going to talk about starting a GPU mining rig, and we're going to talk about the principal component of that rig, which is the motherboard. So imagine you're starting out and you just want to start mining. You've heard everything in the news about crypto. Unless you've been living under a rock, you'll have heard that Bitcoin has shot up this year. And it's gone from, say, £10,000 all the way up to 47. It's now hovering about £28,000. So you can now make money from your computer, old hardware. The last video on this subject was about the RTX 3090 GPU. We talked about the power, performance and the ROI of that card. But today we're going to go back to basics, and I think this is something which, a topic which people find quite difficult when they first start building a mining rig or GPU mining. So everyone knows you need graphics cards, and there's readily available softwares out there now that you can find that just mine for you or reimburse you with cryptocurrency for hashing power. Slightly different from mining itself. The need to cover really is the motherboard, or the basis of the GPU mining rig. And I found it is actually a source of quite a lot of problems and troubleshooting comes from the board itself and some of the settings. Also, depending on your outlook to mining, whether you just want a couple of cards just for a bit of fun, or you want to take it more seriously and start actually adding to your monthly income by earning cryptocurrency, you need to decide really what your objective is when you start building the mining rig. So I've got three potential options here for motherboards that we could use to build a GPU mining rig. So let's dive into it. Option one is an old second-hand, slightly dated, previous generation motherboard. So here we've got an example of that. This is a Gigabyte AM3 board with an FX 6300 CPU plugged into it. Basically you've got a couple of PCI Express slots, 4 RAM slots. You've got a couple of visual outputs, quite handy actually to have VGA, DVI and HDMI all on the same board. You've got 6 USB, and you've got Ethernet and some sound I/O. So it's a very budget way to build a system. Remember, you're going to be building this outside of the case using a GPU mining rig frame. You can buy those or you can build one yourself. A couple of fan headers, a few other bits and bobs. Now, this will be something you can get started mining really quickly, which is advantageous, and it won't cost you loads of money. So maybe you spend £30, $50 on this with a CPU. That will get you started. And what you'll be able to do is put it flat on a table, plug some GPU risers into the slots, sync your GPUs into the slots, power on the system using these pins here, enter the BIOS, check everything's set correctly, and I'll talk a little bit more about which BIOS settings you should look at for troubleshooting purposes later in the video. Boot to the operating system, and hopefully you'll see 2 graphics cards in this case, because we've only got 2 slots. In the device manager, you can then install your mining software of your choice, benchmark the cards, and off you go mining cryptocurrency. So that's fantastic. The downside to this approach is that you are going to be using older hardware. So this means that if any problems come from the hardware, then your rig will be down, and instability is something you really want to avoid. You'll find that plugging multiple GPUs into motherboards that really were only designed to have 1 or maybe 2 graphics cards plugged into them, sometimes not all the cards recognized, and that I think is due to a limitation in the boards themselves. So if you're just doing a bit of hobby mining and you have 1 or 2 spare GPUs, then this is the one to go for, especially if you're on a budget. So let's move on to option 2, which is also a Gigabyte board, but this is a more modern, this is an X370 chipset for the Ryzen platform, and this is a more modern board which has got loads of features like killer Ethernet, USB 3.1 or maybe even 3.2, or gold-plated connectors, etc., etc. You've also got an M.2 slot, so that's nice because it means you can install your software and your OS on here. You don't have to have additional cables, additional mess. We all know mining rigs have got enough of a spider's nest of cables as it is, so that's quite a nice feature to have. Modern boards, you'll also be able to take more system memory, which helps, especially when we've got these GPUs like the 3090, which have a huge amount of VRAM. You don't want to have a great discrepancy between video memory and system memory. So ideally, you can adjust the memory page file in Windows, but ideally you want a fair amount of system memory if you've got GPUs with a lot of video memory. Okay, other nice features about this board, well, we can see you've now got 6 PCI Express slots. We don't have the PCI slot anymore. So remember, on the older boards, they had backwards compatibility for PCI devices, and so they ended up putting maybe 1 or 2 of these PCI connectors there, and that really serves no use in 2021. It just takes up a slot that we could use for PCI Express connector. Other things you'll notice about this board, it's got beefy heat sinks on the VRMs along here at the top. So you'll find that the BIOS, you'll find that the BIOS is quite fully featured. It gives you lots of settings on premium boards. That's kind of helpful when you're mining, because you want to be able to switch between, for example, the system to boot with the iGPU or a discrete GPU, which to look for first, which GPU slot to choose first to look for the device, that kind of thing. Be careful, because if you're looking at a Ryzen system, this isn't an integrated graphics processor or APU. APU? I think AMD calls them APUs. This has no onboard graphics, so you'll have to output video from one of your graphics cards itself, which I think is less desirable. So if you are going to go for a kind of gaming build, then it might be worthwhile using an APU. But really, this option is kind of a halfway house. It's not basic budget like option 1. It's more modern, more stability, more compatibility with modern components like the M.2 NVMe drive, more PCI Express slots, more stability across those slots, and more detailed BIOS that will allow you to adjust more settings that you may need to optimize for mining, and obviously more slots for system memory. So it's a good middle ground for starting cryptocurrency mining. Okay, let's move on. Oh, one thing I should note as well, premium boards, they have the little error message code display. So if you boot your mining rig and it doesn't work straight away, this will say, okay, well, the RAM's not seated correctly, or the CPU has a problem, or maybe one of the graphics cards is loose in the slot. It'll actually tell you that based on the code. So very good for troubleshooting. Okay, moving on to the final option. So it's the third and also most expensive approach to take to building a GPU mining rig. So I'm just gonna have a drink of coffee. Okay, so on to the third option. This is the Asus B250 Mining Expert motherboard. So I'll just hold it up so you can see it a little bit more clearly. And to the uninitiated, this looks like a bit more of a basic board. I mean, if you compare it to the last board, you'd think it's cheap and nasty. There's no fancy anodized aluminium heat sinks. There's only 2 slots for system memory, so you have to be careful what size modules you select. There is only, there's 6 USB, probably 3.0. I doubt that's even got 3.1, so connectivity is less on the back. You do have an HDMI out port, and we'll come back to that later. And then looking at other elements of the card, well, the most obvious thing is you've got 19 PCI Express slots. Again, like the premium gaming option, you don't have a PCI slot, so don't have any wasted slots on this board. The previous two systems were AMD based, and we're now looking at an Intel system. It is outfitted with an Intel Celeron G3930 CPU. I think that's clocked about 3.1 gigahertz. So that's something else I didn't mention as well, is that your CPU choice, well, doesn't affect the mining performance. If you're utilizing the operating system in any way, you can't have something that's 15 years old, single core. You need, with modern operating systems, a quad core, maybe a dual core, and fairly zippy. So you don't need 16 cores of Ryzen performance, no, but it's nice to have something quite modern. Intel CPUs more often than not have the iGPU included. Why is that good? Well, if you're troubleshooting your GPU mining rig, it helps to be able to plug the video output HDMI here, cable in here, and then what happens is that you can take the GPUs on in and out and see if they're detected in Device Manager whilst you're using the onboard video. So that's really, really helpful. That's why going for a gaming style system with a gaming CPU, which probably won't have the onboard integrated video unless you use an APU, but it probably won't have that. So that's an advantage here. So we've got Intel based system, low power but low core but relatively modern CPU, can output integrated video, which helps troubleshooting, and loads of PCI Express slots. Okay, so you've got a few other things. 4 SATA ports, you only need 1. Don't have NVMe, but that's kind of a luxury. And very few, 1 fan header and 1 CPU fan, so 2 in total. It's kind of pathetic, really. This board does look and feel cheaper than this one. Oh, other thing to mention is you've got 3 24-pin EPS power supply connectors on the board, and the way the system works is that you have 1 power supply for each of these different zones on the board. So you've got A zone, which is powered from the top A power connector, B zone for this grouping here of 6 slots, and then C zone for the final 6 slots on the bottom. And that enables you to power all of these cards from different power supplies without having to bridge the power supply connections on a single board. Because think about it, if you had 6 3090s on this board, you wouldn't be able to power that on a single power supply. You need multiple power supplies. So let's consider really the advantages here of having these 3 connectors. So this is a nice feature. Other things which are really good about the Mining Expert, well, the BIOS is pre-configured for mining. So you don't have to faff around adjusting the PCI Express speed 2.0, 3.0 defaults just to get cards to be detected. Mining mode is enabled by default, so that's hugely advantageous. You just power this thing on and all the settings are configured to detect multiple GPUs. We've got 19 slots here, and Asus proudly proclaims that it's a 19 slot motherboard. Well, yes, it is a 19 slot motherboard, but you have to specialize the configuration of cards between AMD and NVIDIA, between gaming cards and specialized mining cards, if you want to get the full 19 slots populated. It'll do up to 13 cards just by plugging any old GPU in. So if you wanted to put 13 3070s in here, you could do so. I've only been up to 11, 12, and the board was stable and did find all the cards in Device Manager, so that was really good. The other cool feature about this board is that when you power on the system, in the post screen, you'll see a graphical overlay, and it's got a sort of schematic of the card, and slots are either clear where there's no GPU present, green or red. If it's green, it's detected the GPU, everything's fine. You then progress to device manager, check the device is recognized correctly, and then if you need to, you install drivers, then you run your mining software. So that's how that works. Really, really good system, because it basically rules out hardware errors. So cable's not connected properly, maybe your PCI Express power connectors aren't connected, maybe it's loose in the slot. Really, really good system actually. If you're red, something is incorrect. So as I mentioned, usually for me it was that I'd swapped the cards over and I hadn't pushed the power supply PCI Express connector, the 6+2 pin, hadn't pushed that fully into the slot. And this thing tells you before you go down the road of troubleshooting everything in the operating system. So that's really cool. Okay, so let's go over the summary then. So 3 power supplies, so you can have multiple GPUs. Can't have 19 unless you want to jump through hoops for Asus's configuration. You can only have 13. The CPU is great, low power draw, powerful enough to run Windows and a little bit of internet browsing. 2 memory slots. Make sure you don't put 4 gig of RAM in here, put 16 or even 32. Especially with these new generation cards, you need to have a dollop of system memory. What else about this one? Yeah, it's got the nice overview screen, and really it is the go-to mining motherboard. Released in 2017, and used prices, I was going to talk about price now as we come to the end of the video. Used prices of this board are £350. I've seen some listed as a buy it now for £600 for this board. It's incredible. But yeah, the mining craze continues. It rolls onwards and onwards. So I probably wouldn't buy this board today. I'd probably go for a more mid-range option, see how you get on. My advice is to wait until the crypto winter eventually hits, and then everyone will sell off their GPU mining rigs to recoup their costs. If you're really interested in mining and you believe in crypto and you believe in the 3-year cycle of bull run and bust and all that stuff, all that good stuff, then consider picking this stuff up cheap on the Bay or Facebook Marketplace when people just are flogging it. And it inevitably will happen. At the end of this cycle, Bitcoin will crash to nothing, mine will go out of vogue, and people will sell these boards for 20 or 30 quid. It happened before. I've seen it. I remember it in 2018. People just getting shot of all these old mining stuff. So snap it all up, chuck it in a box in your attic, and when the next bull run comes, you're ready to go. Set up your rig, and if you're making more money than the electricity costs, then you are in profit. Okay guys, so I'll stop the video there, and if you've got any questions or comments about building a mining rig, then drop it down in the comment section below. If you could do me a massive favour, please like the video, because it really helps us with the algorithm, and also my ego as well, which needs inflating from time to time. But no, seriously, it does help a lot with the algorithm. Okay, so I'll catch you on the next one. Thanks for listening, everyone.